Welcome back into Mining Stock Daily, everybody. Going to head back to the state of Wisconsin with GreenLight Metals here. They do trade on the TSX Venture with the symbol GRL and on the OTCQB with GRLMF. The company has published new drill results. That was published in the morning briefing here this morning, but a couple days ago, they also had a big announcement with being entered into the Fast 41 Transparency Project with the federal U.S. government. Happy to tackle all these news items with CEO Mr. Matt Filgate. So Matt, good morning. Welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. Appreciate it. A lot of exciting news over the last couple of days, so dive into it. And
yeah, let's jump into it. And I do want to start with the permitting news here. Earlier this week, the Bend project's now been added to that U.S. federal permitting dashboard. For investors who may not appreciate the significance, what does this designation actually change for GreenLight over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so I think first off, it's really the validates what we're doing in Wisconsin. Having the federal government come in and show support for the project at this level is very significant. We submitted a prospecting permit on federal land to cover a broad area around our Bend project. And so that's for a drill campaign that we're looking to kick off this November. So it's about 28 drill sites. We're looking at somewhere in that 10 to 15,000 meters of drilling. So it's a much broader area than the current area that we're drilling in, which is on a private mineral estate. And that process, for the most part, can be a difficult process because there's multiple agencies involved and timelines and steps to get through that. What this does is it streamlines that process. It makes it very transparent to the public, what milestones need to be hit. So, for example, we're looking to put out our EA on the Bend project by the end of this month. And that'll, that timeline will be on the dashboard. You can see when that comes public, and then it goes to public consultation, and then it goes through that, series of different consultations, ultimately to a decision point by November. But what this does is it keeps, the Forest Service and the BLM accountable to those timelines. We get a dedicated agent that works for the permitting counseling group out of DC, and they work with us and they work with the agencies as well to make sure that those timelines are met and kept on track. So really, it's about transparency, and it's about sticking to those timelines to make the permitting process as efficient as possible. And then, of course, one day as we move forward and potentially go down the plan of operations or mine plan of operations, being part of the Fast 41 program, it allows us to kind of step up into that more burdensome permitting process for one day to become a mine. So it's a very significant step for us, and that endorsement from the White House, from DC, is significant. It really shows that they are serious about advancing critical metal projects in the U.S. And doing it on a pretty strict timeline.
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of the Fast 41 initiative here. I will admit I don't know all the mining projects are within that portfolio currently where it stands, but my initial thought is Bend is maybe very much one of the earlier stage projects within the Fast 41 timeline. You're shaking your head, yes, so obviously that validates a little bit of that statement. So how does this now, even with this kind of, early stage nature of where you're at in the life cycle of mine development, how does this Bend now become part of a broader national strategic initiative? Or, how are we supposed to look at this, given where it's at within early stage exploration?
Yeah, so the Fast 41 program, so there's kind of two streams to it. We're in the transparency stream, which is projects that are in exploration development stage.
Okay.
So haven't entered the full mine permitting process. They look at the project itself, so it's actually a pretty rigorous process. They do a full review of the asset to see if it is something that is strategic and of interest to the U.S. government. And so we checked all those boxes. And so that's how we got into the transparency stream. And then, once we go out for a mine permit, we get graduated up to that infrastructural kind of higher level permitting oversight from the government.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Well, congratulations on this. Obviously, everything was up on the website there at the Fast 41 website, so people can continue to watch that if they do so choose. And so, obviously, this comes along with the exploration work. We have new drill results just reported this morning here, Matt. So let's turn to the drilling. That latest intercept, 52 meters, 1.12 grams per ton gold, or a 1.28% copper equivalent, depending on which ones you like to look at the most. But you continue to build confidence here with the deposit. What stands out most to you about these results, just beyond those headline grades?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We knew in the historic resource that there was a footwall zone that sat under the massive sulfide, and it had been intersected a few times in the past and had some pretty good gold grades. The copper grades kind of started to fall off, but the gold grades really picked up. And so, we'd intersected that footwall a few times, and we saw some of the kind of lower grade gold. But as we stepped over and did a deeper hole, we actually intersected a very thick sequence of that footwall mineralization. So that's what we're seeing here, in holes 9 and 9W. So, these broader kind of 40 to 50 meter intervals of 1 to 1.5 gram gold. Copper is typically zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.3, so it does come down from the average of the kind of core massive sulfide zone. But it's very interesting. It adds significant tonnage. When we look to do a resource by the end of this year, early next year, that cutoff will likely be somewhere in that 0.8 to 1% copper equivalent. So when we're seeing
Hmm.
these zones of 10 meters at 2.5 to 3% copper equivalent, when you factor in that gold and the lower grade copper, it falls well within that resource level, and it adds significant tonnage in this footwall zone that was never considered ore back when they did the resource in 1996, 1997. So it adds a lot of upside to the project. Obviously, we've been signaling to the market that we'd like to see 15 plus million tons at Bend. And so this actually goes a long way to adding significant tonnage to the deposit. And then we hit a pretty nice zone in hole 11 as well, which is down dip of hole 6, which we put out not too long ago, which was 10 meters of a percent copper and just over a gram gold. So that's, again, 2.5% copper equivalent. And so these zones just keep coming and coming as we step out along strike and go down dip. And so what we're doing now is we're stepped out even further, another 100 meters to the east. We have both drills over there, and we're continuing to drill down dip, down plunge, and we continue to see mineralization. So this deposit now, when we first started, it had a historic strike length of around 330 meters, and now
Hmm.
we've drilled another 300 meters of strike. Add basically doubling the strike extent of the deposit. So we're seeing consistent grades. This gold zone is very interesting. Obviously, it's exciting on a project like this. A lot of VMS deposits typically are in that kind of zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.5 gram per ton gold. We're seeing an average of 2 to 2.5 grams at the Bend project. So, whether you want to call it a gold deposit or a copper deposit, I mean, it's one or the other. They're both adding, significantly to the economics of how this thing will play out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with plus $4,000 per ounce gold right now in the market, roughly $6.50 per pound of copper here. I mean, the in situ value here at Bend looks pretty intriguing, but you did mention, eventually putting some economics on this project here, Matt. Does
Yeah.
this latest drilling kind of expedite that plan, or does it cause more reason for follow up, more drilling, and more definition before you can consider doing that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we would like to get out a maiden resource by the end of this year, early 2027.
Okay.
This new permit that we've submitted for, we'd like to get that 10 to 15,000 meters done by January so that we can incorporate that into a resource statement, because the western side of the deposit hasn't seen any extension drilling. We have a couple historic holes that are out there that range anywhere from zero point 0.7 to 1.5% copper over good widths, kind of that 15 to 20 meter thickness, but never chased up on that western side. So we think that we can add a lot of tonnage over there as well. So
Mhm.
really, this is an exercise in, okay, let's continue to drill, continue to step out, and then do some infill drilling, get the numbers we want internally, and then present them to the market. And then if those numbers look good, and then, for us, I think anything over uh, 10 million tons is a good deposit here. But obviously, we're looking for more. We want 15 to 20. If those numbers come into that range, then we'll start to look at economics on it right away. Yeah, obviously, we want to move fairly quick on this project, and so if it looks like it could be an economic mine, we'll start that PEA level work right away after that resource.
I mean, other than the scale kind of being that overhanging question here, Ben, what other technical questions here of the project are yet to be, answers? What are those biggest questions you're kind of need to get answered as before you can really, unlock this thing to get ready for real development work?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're building our geological model right now. We've hired SGS internally, so we're working with them. Our geologists are working with them to build out a new geological model. There's certainly two zones here, and that football zone, we want to understand that a bit better, the true thickness of it, because as we're closer to surface, we see a lot of thick, massive sulfide, and then that footwall zone can be very fairly short or thin, kind of in the 5 to 10 meter thickness. As we get deeper, we're actually seeing it thicken, and we're seeing consistent mineralization across it. So we don't have a full understanding of how that's behaving down at depth, as we've only drilled this deposit down to 400 meters vertical depth right now. So that's one of the technical questions that we have is, okay, well, what's going on down at 6, 7, 800 meters here? Are we getting this pinching and swelling of massive sulfide lenses? Is there different lenses down there? Do we just have this big, broad thickening of this volcanic sequence that is carrying good gold grades? What's happening here? So really, it's this all comes with drilling. The more drilling we do, every drill hole is another data piece and adds to the overall picture. So that's one of the key things that we're trying to understand right now is the interaction between that footwall and the massive sulfide zone and the thickening of it at depth. The other thing that we're working on with SGS is we're going to be doing metallurgical testing and
Mm,
metallurgical studies on this project. So there was some work done in the mid 1990s that showed good recovery. On the gold was around 91%, and the copper was around 89 to 90%. We'd like to see that get up to 95, 94% with modern technique, modern recovery techniques. So that's something else that is an unknown right now. So we want to see what we can get the recoveries up to. But we do have a pretty good understanding overall of the system and the structure. It's not like a lot of these VMS systems where it's heavily folded and faulted and broken apart. It's actually a very cohesive volcanic sequence with these massive sulfide lenses sitting in that sequence. They formed on the bottom of the ocean a billion years ago near these vent centers, and so it's unique in the fact that, it isn't actually that complex, the geology. It's been very consistent across the deposit, and it
mhm.
actually has allowed for us to vector into massive sulfide zones. The geologists know, okay, we're in a chloritic volcanic sequence right now, and we should be hitting massive sulfide in the next 15 meters, and typically, boom, there it is. So it is very nice from a targeting perspective, but really the question for us is what's going on at depth. I think we can get 15 plus million tons in kind of the current footprint of what we're exploring. But really that upside, these 40, 50 million ton VMS deposits that you see, they got to go down deep. Kid
Yeah,
Creek is an example of one, right? I think they're at 3 kilometers depth at Kid Creek. So, these things can continue to go down to depth. So that's a real question for us as a company is, how deep does this system go? And so we will look in this next phase in the fall to do a couple big step back holes, punch down, try and intersect 900 meters down and test, does the system continue? Because if it does, then we're not talking about 15 million tons here. We're talking about something much bigger.
right. Well, okay, so let me run through some in the back of my head here. I
Sure.
think most people listening to the podcast are saying 15 million tons, like, yeah, that's a good start. But maybe because the state of Wisconsin, mining has not been part of its ecosystem for such a long time. Maybe a 50 million ton project is a better feature for the jurisdiction than it is a bug for the investment community. And I'm just throwing this out there, and you can push back or agree, disagree, whatever you want. But if you were to get to 15 million tons with maybe a relatively smaller footprint for a
Hmm.
potential mine situation, that would be easier to permit and then add on to later in its life if it was open to depth, you found continued mineralization,
Yeah.
than it would be if perhaps Bend does host 40 million tons, but that would then be a little bit more challenging, is maybe you get a little bit more pushback because of its size. I'm just throwing that out there and just,
Yeah, look,
seeing what you think.
Trevor, I would tend to agree with you on that. I think, Wisconsin hasn't seen an active mine since 1996, and the last mine that was in production was Flambeau, which was run by Rio Tinto. And that they only did 4 million tons there. High grade, it was 6% copper, but they did 4 million tons out of there, and it's a very successful, very profitable mine. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I agree. Sometimes when you go and approach a state and say we want to build this massive mine, it's going to be, big infrastructure. It can get a bit of the nerves can kind of pick up a little bit.
Yeah.
Like for us, yeah, we if we can prove it up to 15 million tons, that's when we start permitting it. Um, we've always said as a company, and something that we are focused on right now is direct shipping the ore to a centralized facility. Now that facility doesn't exist in Wisconsin, but we're actively reviewing locations, kind of in the general Bend area or Taylor County, if you will, or Rusk County next door. um, Kind of, is there an opportunity to build a large facility that could ultimately one day feed multiple mines in Wisconsin? Because, we focus on Bend right now, but there's a pipeline of other projects in the general vicinity of Bend, call it within 50 miles of Bend, that are very prospective. And so, like
Yeah.
the real global vision for Wisconsin and the mining industry there is, get Bend going as a small mine, and continue to grow it, but also bring other projects online and direct ship them to a centralized facility, something that could potentially be state funded, or community funded, and we work closely with the communities. It would create a ton of jobs. The rail infrastructure in the Bend area is incredible. I think we're about 3 miles from rail. And then some of these other assets that we're looking at are, some of them have rail running right through them. So, I think that is probably the best outcome, um, for GreenLight and also for the state, is having that centralized facility. So, yeah, to answer that question, I agree with you, Trevor. I think that a smaller mine would be a good way to kick things off in Wisconsin, and then
Mhm.
obviously you have all the upside of growing it down at depth.
Very good. Okay. Matt, thanks so much for your time. Good to connect with you once again. Congratulations on the
Thanks.
permitting stuff. And obviously, we'll be watching the more drill results hit the tape here out of the Bend project. GreenLight Metals once again trades on the venture with GRL and on the OTCQB with GRLMF. Matt, have a great rest of your summer. Thanks so much.
Yes, thanks. You too, Trevor.
The information presented should not be considered investment advice. Mining Stock Daily and its affiliates are not responsible for any loss arising from any investment decision in connection with the material presented herein. Please do your own research or speak with a licensed financial representative before making any investment decisions.